not only for their own experience, but what they've heard and participated in today. You saw the questions that are here. They're pretty general. The first one, though, I think relates to prioritization. What can we do, it says here, immediately and a little further down the road? Anybody want to take it? What should we start with? Randy?
Well,
He said.
I think we want to recognize that this is a topic that is kind of overkill. Everybody knows we have to talk to our congressman, we have to do more op-eds, and Todd jokingly says back to me, and don't forget to the outreach to the children. But I think it helps for us for a minute to recognize that although we're talking about the cases as only the tip of the iceberg, that the vast value of the IP assets are dealt with without controversy and without difficulty, the cases and the public policy issues which we deal with are still the visible tip of the iceberg, and they do form the opinions, they create the environment that affects the value of IP. And to the extent that you have even one or two cases that are reflecting poorly on IP and its valuation, that has a damaging impact on portfolios. And so from the business standpoint, you've got to learn how to maintain your value despite the bad press, if you want to call it that.
Right. Anyone else, Bob?
I mean, some of my takeaways, Ashley, who was in my breakout group, did an excellent job of reviewing. But at least to me, the things that seem most important to me are, A, I have the sense, maybe I don't know enough, there needs to be better coordination among the various groups who are stakeholders in this IP.
Well, tell me about that. How would you do that, though? I mean, you've been around a long time. You've seen a lot of different groups.
Well, I think, first of all, you got to start with a list of all the groups and a point person at each group and an ability to communicate information back and forth. So, and maybe somebody, maybe this group, Bruce, contains the master lists of relevant information, activities, and things like that. But it seems to me, again, I'm not deeply into this part of it, but it seems to me, from what I do know, that better coordination is necessary.
Okay.
Number two, I think more data is necessary. There's a lot more that can be done about to negate some of the arguments about what trolls are and who the plaintiffs in a lot of the cases are, or what interests they represent, and how those companies got their patents and competed against the big guys and couldn't make it and had nothing left, blah, blah. I think that's something that you can collect data on. I think you can get data. I think one thing that would be interesting to me regarding the PTAB and is what percentage of patents invalidated by PTAB are invalidated on the basis of newly cited prior art to the PTAB. And a number of people have said they thought that there's a lot of them that are invalidated by newly cited prior art, but nobody could lead me to anything specific on that. I think we need to figure out, and I don't know the answer when we asked the journalists. I don't know, they gave me great answers.
Well, Todd, you worked on all these organizations. They've been moving away from cooperation, not towards it.
I think that's unfortunately correct.
Why?
Their positions change for a variety of reasons. They find other, new leadership comes in that reprioritizes. They don't want to spend the money anymore. There's a lot of different reasons. Unless, with the exception of, I think, certain technology groups that have been able to, because this is a very important prioritized issue to them, have stayed together, and particularly through their trade groups. In DC at least, I'm not talking more beyond that. I gave the chilling example. I used to be GE's chief IP counsel in our breakout session. And I worked on the 21C for 8 years trying to help get AIA right. I would suggest to people they read the GE only brief in oil states. I guarantee you that was not the position of GE at the time I was there. They have shifted their position, and I would guess the folks in this room aren't going to be too wild about it. So they come and they go in certain ways. But let me ask you about data, though. I would say we're swimming in data, and the data gets manipulated. Is there a way to, will people really listen to data anymore? Scott?
Well, I tend to think you need to stay away from the data if you're trying to get the message out to the masses. And, the message I think we need to get out is that this is critical to society. And I think most human beings don't understand the impact that intellectual property has on their lives. I think it's no different than pollution. It's all around them. They may be having trouble breathing, but they don't understand what's going on. And or something's in the water. They don't see it. They drink it and they get sick. They don't understand what's going on. I don't think they understand. I don't think most human beings, citizens around the world understand the impact that intellectual property has on their lives. It's like air, and it's the oxygen. And I think we need to talk about it in those terms. I think that if they understood that the knowledge economy ceases to exist without intellectual property, that essentially knowledge has no economic value without intellectual property. If everybody can simply copy, take, use whatever you create, comes out of your mind, there's no value. There's no economic value to what's created. There's no incentive to people to move society forward. So I think we got to stay away from the data, and I think we need to put it on simple terms and get people to understand this is the air they breathe, and if they don't protect it, there's going to be. Well, that's how. Then you get them to talk to your congressman. Then you get them to take steps to actually make change. But right now, they don't think it's important and a part of their lives.
You're your inventor. Tell us.
Yeah, I want to bridge to that. Maybe a bridge too far. First of all, I missed the pie charts at the beginning of this. How many people are patent practitioners in the room? Show of hands. Yeah, vast majority. So that's the perspective that we're digesting this today. I'm an inventor, but I'm also a patent agent. So I guess I'm part of the club. And but the way I see things, because I've also helped run businesses over my time at Motorola. I've been gone for 10 years and I've done a lot of other things, and now have accumulated 311 patents to my name. So I've seen the steps of identifying innovation, doing something about it, and monetizing it in a lot of different ways. And to me, if you believe this, make this connection with me. I think economics drives all of business strategy. So if you connect economics to business strategy, and even people at the beginning of this conference said IP strategy, which is what all of us as practitioners should be helping our clients with to some degree, IP strategy is part of business strategy. I think everyone would agree with that. And so you can make a connection right up to the economics. I think what we need to pay attention to is some of the economic analysis that can be done, has been done, in a shifting market where the consumer is, we're just looking for bite-sized, information, where in the past it was only large companies with huge labs that could innovate, and now it's anybody with a computer and an idea and two friends that can, rent one of these cheap incubators here in Chicago and come up with a great company, in 5 years have a killer exit, which is what they all want to do. So the barriers have come down, for people to innovate and to, create some value along the way. And I think economics, understanding that at all levels, government understanding the economics, CEOs of large companies, and I'll differentiate CEOs of smaller companies, which is what I deal with all the time, understanding the economics, and they'll see where they can invest, and they can see where they can, monetize it in a good way. We've had so much discussion today about, litigation and even the troll thing seemed to me a little bit, too much time on it. But the litigation stuff is super important, because if we don't have that as, and sure, it's a minority in
And Gary, you're sort of saying two different things rather, and that I find is not an uncommon thing in this debate.
Yeah.
The innovators, and I think you're right. Also, in terms of how the market is shifting, the barriers to entry coming down, does that make it easier to sell IP because it protects that stuff, or does it make it harder because the barrier's down and everybody's?
Yeah, it's harder. Yeah, it's harder because a lot of people. I talk to CEOs at smaller companies all the time, and they have, many of them do not have what I call intellectual property scar tissue, where they've gone through, they've started a business, they got sued, they sued someone else, they generated. Not all of them have. So this awareness thing is really topical, and I find that half of my, or more than half the time, when I engage with these guys in the beginning, in the sales cycle, and then when I execute as part of an arrangement, it's education, about the value of IP. It really is. And they need some of those stories. They need, how you can monetize things. And what I hate to hear is when, and to me, it's a lot of people in Silicon Valley, they say technology moves too fast. I'm sorry, you can't patent it, okay? And think about, I want to give everyone a metaphor here to think about. And it's what I use, and when the young company CEOs I talk to see it, hear it, get it, they use it all the time, and they say it makes sense. And what I call it the patent tree. And there's three parts of so picture a tree. It's got roots, there's a trunk, and there's leaves and branches. Down at the roots, that represents the root technologies for your company for the long term. It goes on and on forever. And they're technology independent innovations down there. So as MIPS, on processors get better, and memory gets denser and cheaper, and bandwidth of links and things like that, I'm talking communications field, gets better and better, those stay, those remain, and those are like maybe 20, 30, patents out of a large portfolio because they really are important. They're technology independent.
Yeah, let me
So
let me
that's
take one
what you
piece.
need to focus on to abate that problem,
Yeah.
where a lot of people say, hey, there's no value in it.
Well,
Focus on that
let
one.
me take one piece of this question though, and maybe it's one of the core issues. We've talked a fair amount. There's what, 100 people in this room, maybe 120 people in this
Yeah,
room.
yeah.
Top, cream of the crop, frankly. But we're talking to each other. How do we get the message out beyond all this? How do and you're sort of saying, well, I'll go to one, small startup at a time, or one
Right.
high school
Yeah.
class at a time.
Yeah.
How can we get past that?
Yeah.
Got it, Bob? Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, to me, I have a couple of ideas. One is the media thing. I don't think it's about high school classes. That's a 20-year project if you do it that way. I think it's finding more business school professors to drink the Kool-Aid and write justified articles on the patent system and what's happening to it. I think take advantage of the Chinese competitive environment and the relative, I think that's something that's critically important. We ought to find somebody to present that. Maybe the administration will do something good for a change.
I noticed you're speaking of the faculty, I think one of the things that happened roughly contemporaneously as we went to where we went during the troll era and before it, a lot of law professors that were coming into the patent field seemed to get their tenure by being critical of the IP, by telling how horrible it was. Now you're starting to see some go in the other direction because it's too crowded on the anti-side. We got to move over to the plus side. Randy, you're a professor. Anything to any of that? Can they help?
It's interesting to me to see that at least in the foreign law schools, there's a enthusiasm about IP that I don't see in the American academic community.
Okay.
And that, again, has some effect on the environment as a whole.
And focusing on law schools, is that the right approach? Should we be focusing on business schools?
Well, it's a
Economics
part of the
professors and all
equation.
that.
I don't know if it's the whole story, but I think it's an important part. We had an excellent address at lunch today or after lunch, and it'd be refreshing if we had a lot more of that.
Scott, anything? In general, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just,
About the communications.
I think you need to touch all facets of society and whether it's schools. I think we couldn't start early enough with our children. I think for just the average citizen, I think if we can get some articles written and getting them to understand that this is society impacting and there's something terrible going on around them, and there'll be a crisis before they know it. I really do think there are some really bad things happening, and if they want investment in technologies, if they want cures for cancer, things like that, something's got to change. And I think these are the people we need to ask them to go again to the congressman. But I think it's a variety of ways. It's not one simple thing. But if we can touch and media message them in a variety of ways, we can get there.
Todd, just in the last year, I've been invited to Hong Kong, Singapore, Seoul, and Tokyo, all four of which want to be the IP hub.
Right.
You've heard
I've
the
been
IP
to 2 or
hub
3 of those,
thing.
right?
And they've had IP hub meetings where they call in judges and government officials, and then it's interesting to me even more that within China, I've had Shanghai, Nanjing, Changsha, and Chengdu. The four of them are competing to be the IP hub instead of just Beijing.
Yeah.
They all use the same terminology, but the interesting point there is that I sometimes make fun of the subsidization of IP in the Chinese system, but at least it's really an effort to support the system. I don't see I don't see New York competing with San Francisco to be the IP hub.
Yep. No. I'll tell you another.
How do you create that kind of mentality?
Put Amazon in their town, the second office.
Well, Amazon is got a bidding war going
Yeah,
for them,
yeah,
so
they
maybe
do.
there's something to that.
I also noticed, you and I have been to Africa a couple of times, in South Africa in particular, they have a national tech transfer policy and a national technology transfer office that helps facilitate
Yeah.
that. We don't have anything close to that. NIH maybe, but nothing close to an agency which would help facilitate tech transfer. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know.
I think it's a bad thing. I think there's a certain energy and everybody wanting to be the leader. And the law schools all want to be. Tsinghua is fighting desperately to beat out Peking as the IP leader. I don't see the same thing going on as much in the U.S.
Yep.
I think the last thing the world needs is more governmental bureaucrats. I've represented the South African TTO in only one case, but I can tell you it's pretty confounded.
I realized that the slide up here is different than the one in here. So I started with what's actually the second question, I guess, and that's the prioritization question. So I got away from it a little bit. What should we do now? And what can wait a while, if anything? Gary?
Well, with respect to the next generation,
Yep.
I think STEM is really important, and a lot of the programs that sponsor that. Thank God we have things like the robotics competitions, and there's a couple of variants of that running around, where kids get excited about technology, and I mean, part of that should be about owning it. How many of us have been as practitioners to a cocktail party and someone says, "Oh, you're in the patent business. I got a great idea," right? You hear this all the time, and not knowing all of the things about it. They have a positive impression about if you're a patent owner, it's a good thing, which is interesting, And then if you say, well, would you be willing to assert that against someone that's using your idea? And because I ask them that intentionally, and they say, yeah, I probably would if I owned it. Well, then the public may not be as far away as we think, just based on my one unofficial poll. But I think the next generation how do we get them to, and I'm asking questions more than giving answers, but I mean, how do we get them to have heroes that are innovators? We got Tony Stark in the movies, right? With Iron Man, and others, who are these guys who made it big. They're billionaires, and I mean, some section of
We've
young
got
people I talk
inventors.
to,
We've got some represented here today. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think Thomas Edison or a lot of his patent attorneys to publicize his.
I know.
So
But anyway, it's multifaceted, but
Okay.
at least one I feel is the younger generation. I had mentored some young people in high school, and once they get it and they see it, the light bulb goes on, and it's like, hey, I want to do this,
Let me ask a very specific question as an inventor, and others may want to weigh in, or someone may hear. Back 20 years ago, when I was at the office and we were doing the AIPA, a major force then and for years before that were the inventor groups around the country, and they were coordinated, and there were lots of them, and they stayed in the game fairly long. I mean, I remember Capos and I having to fly to Reno because Senator Reed had to hear from his Reno inventor chapter before he'd agree to let some bill go.
Yeah, right.
But they've sort of faded away.
Yeah.
They used to have enormous influence.
Yeah.
Should we help them or find them, or where are they?
Yeah, I think that'd be difficult to resurrect. I don't know. I'll pass it around for that one.
I still see emails from them.
Yeah.
You probably get the same ones, but you're right. I don't see
The
the
passion.
organized community at the lobbying doorsteps.
I don't know if you remember Wilson Greatbatch, great guy, invented the pacemaker, as I recall. He sat in congressional office after congressional office, day after day after day. It was kind of like his hobby after he retired, and had enormous influence.
I think they're the first group, or one of the first groups that's losing their lives. That they're not getting the oxygen anymore. I mean, they'd probably be a great example to have news stories around. the inventor, the solo inventor almost ceases to exist in our society today. The cost of getting a patent application, the time that it takes to get your patent, and then, likelihood that it's enforceable, and the cost and the time to even find out against anybody that's got any real product they're selling. The solo inventor almost ceases to exist, and I think if if American citizens understood that, I think they would not be happy.
Bob?
In the same vein, I saw an article recently, I think in the Wall Street Journal, that investments by VCs in startup companies was down by about 20% in the last year or two. I mean, I'm a little hazy on the specifics, but remember 20%. And I don't know if maybe the data's out there, but I mentioned this before. One of the first things I would do is try to survey, or at least do some preliminary surveys, and then if it's promising, more detailed surveys of the various VCs to see how they look at the changes in the patent system and how that affects their investment decisions, which are critical to the growth of these early stage entrepreneurial companies.
Well, we've had Bob Taylor, who represents them, testify 2 or 3 times now.
I don't like
To an
to
effect.
do inside baseball stories very often, but I can remember a distinct luncheon of the judges of the Federal Circuit where a debate broke out as to whether IP was really just the servant of large business or whether it did have still a role of helping the garage inventor. And it was debated vigorously. You might even be able to guess who was on which side. But the ultimate outcome was, I think the majority thought it was a big business enterprise and that was the controlling force, and that was the...
This goes to show how much they know. I represent a pretty fair amount over the last a lot of years of small garage inventors looking for funding. I don't claim to, I'm in Philadelphia, I know what I see in my own practice, and I can tell you that the garage inventor needs money from the traditional sources of funding as much as ever, and it's as important as ever if you want to see those people succeed.
Scott, you
I
represent
think
big-
the ultimate answer is every one of the big businesses started in the garage, right? Apple, I don't care
Well,
what it is.
I don't know where Alexander Graham Bell did his work, but he was, if they had garages even then. But Scott, you represent big business, I guess, in a way up here. What do you think
Did you
of
start
that?
in a garage?
No, I did not. They were already big when I got there. But I do think, again, gets back to the point, I think Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, those guys literally were solo inventors, and they could come up with a great invention, they could get patents, and they could, name the price and get, a fair return on their investment. Again, that doesn't exist today, if you ask me. Now, it doesn't mean that startups don't exist, but I think startups, when they get invested in, whether it's a big corporation like mine or it's a venture capitalist, you may feel like you're investing in intellectual property. I think you're more investing in the intellectual capital in people's minds and savvy business people. But again, the patents that they have, the way things are going, not a good chance that those things are going to be worth a whole lot if they ever get litigated.
Right.
So, at the end of the day, you're betting on people.
Thomas Edison used to go camping with the President of the United States. That was probably one way to get somebody's ear, I guess.
And when you get big enough, you can do that.
I get involved with a lot of startups, and I have an observation about VCs. To me, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of companies, they just need their capital for sure, to take it to the next level. There's just no way they cannot self-fund. Okay, the founders wish they could, they can't. They've got to have that money. But the VC guys, I have almost never, which is weird, see them encourage the startup to have an aggressive patent, portfolio, to take advantage and to right level, the size and depth and breadth of that portfolio. And the reason to me is real clear. Okay, if the S curve for patent value is racing ahead of the S curve for value to the company because of sales of product, okay, the net value is coming up sooner than the VCs are used to. And if a VC comes in and wants to do another round, and they do many times, they are going to pay a higher price in that second round. If you can keep the patent value to the end right before an exit, the VC is going to take advantage of that for sure. Any other investor, and come in later and later and later and get really favorable pricing. And it's really detrimental and dilutive to the founders. And so it's a double-edged sword, unfortunately. So that's one of the reasons I don't see them with, it's usually check the box. Do you have a patent program, a process? Do you have a certain budget, a run rate? They want to see those kind of things, and then leave it up to the management team. But I wish they were looking at the economics more as well. Yeah.
Well, don't we usually try to counsel them? Not the first thing, you may think you need to get a patent right off as a first thing, but you probably don't. You probably need somebody who's going to make you a good model, or somebody who's going to find your money for you, or something like that. You counsel them a lot?
Depends on the invention. I'm in both. Yeah, a good model is important, but it depends on where they are and what you think they've got. Certainly, and if you got enough money, they go hand in hand. You want to do both because you want to keep the process moving.
Right.
Because in order to make the licensing decision or the investment decision, the better the model, the better off you are, the easier that people are going to give you buy-in.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had a crazy idea. This is a crazy
Put it out there.
idea. But I spoke with Patrick Kilbride about it at lunch. I happened to see about 6 months ago on the John Oliver program, one of his 10-minute diatribes against patent trolls, and it nauseated me, but hey, it's America. And I wondered whether it was possible to get to a different one of these late-night comedians, like a Colbert or somebody like that. And so I spoke to Patrick about it, and Patrick said that the International Chamber of Commerce has members in the entertainment world, and he's at least going to sniff around and see whether that's an idea worth floating. Again, it's a crazy idea, but that's one way of commuting with.
It's helpful that Steve Silver's a good example, because his brother's Ed Colbert, who was the former managing partner at Kenyon, and now is at
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Texas, yeah.
Okay.
My wild idea has been to wonder why we don't get the copyright, trademark, and patent communities together for some kind of a common IP venture. They
Okay.
certainly have a lot of commercially in common, and they have a good deal of distress in each of their areas. So I don't know if that's a possibility.
Well, I think it is to some degree. I think you see that sometimes in Washington. You have IP Day or something on the Hill, and then there's a World IP Day, for example, is an example of it. But it never, their interests start to diverge pretty
Very
quickly, and you have a
quickly.
problem
I agree.
keeping them together. Well, that's one of the questions up here. How do we keep them together? The last question, how can business, government, other groups work together? And that's asking an awful lot, particularly given where policy making is today.
They're
but
not going to, I don't think, probably.
Does it, technology, where does the nature of the technology come in? Let me go out on a third rail, or touch a third rail here. The NAS study was a grounding principle of what we should do for reform, said that all patent policy had to be technology neutral. Is that still valid? Does pharma need one thing and software need another? Can we manage that?
I mean, the Patent Office issued the report in July, the Alice Mayo report, and I read that, and it was pretty interesting. And hey, look, both sides of the coin, what they were doing was synthesizing opinions that various people with different axes to grind were presenting.
Yeah.
And both sides of the coin can make persuasive arguments for their cases. That's what lawyers do. And at least myself, thinking about it, I don't know that there's any reason for differentiating between the software side and the pharma side. As I mentioned before, my grandson's starting a PhD in biomedical engineering, and his interest is growing human tissue and organs from stem cells,
Sure.
which gets down to I don't know the details, pretty basic stuff, and you run into Mayo, which is
Very
really an
quickly.
extension of the Alice
Right.
analysis. So to me, it's all in the same batch, and it sinks or dies together.
Well, biopharma is pushing for an example of that, though, and they were in the debate we've had in the last couple of years, couple of congresses. They felt that the things were moving in the wrong direction, and they proposed saying if you were subject to Hatch-Waxman, you should not be subject to an IPR. You should be carved out of IPRs. That would be a differentiator, wouldn't it?
Indeed it will. That's beyond my pay grade.
The usual answer I give is sort of like, well, where are you going to draw the line here? And what do you want to draw the line for? For term? You want to shorten terms here and lengthen terms there? Is that what you want? Okay, sure, that's what I want. Well, fine. So where's the patent lawyer in the room who's going to allow his client to get into the short-term category if he can avoid it and not get sued for malpractice? Of course not. Drawing those lines is impossible.
Well, I was still processing the technology category, topic.
Okay, please do.
And we have a crisis here about patenting software. Today, my practice and people I know that are doing it a little more cleverly, if you will, is to where we used to bundle together a whole bunch of inventions into one master provisional, and that's a way just to get a bunch of ideas way ahead of productization sometimes, get a priority date. And you do the conversion on one of those, and you get an examiner who just immediately, and it's like, I think it's twice as often as it used to happen, you get a 101 rejection, abstract idea, not patent eligible. You guys are all fighting the same thing, right? Is it like twice is what it used to be? It seems like it. And it's software. It's like, well, it's an abstract idea. It's just software. And it's like, hey, this is solving real world problems, and it's on a computer, and the computer now has more value because it's got our software on it. And it's really hard. So what we've done is we've busted up these applications because sometimes there is a, what I'm trying to describe is there is a difference in the understanding, training, whatever it is, with examiners, and an examiner is not an examiner. And so, when you do a bunch of cases that are related and do continuations, you usually get the same guy, the same examiner. And if they are stuck on, it's ineligible, you're wrestling with that guy for all these other applications that are in that same family. So we bust them up now on purpose to, try to get different examiners. Frankly, that's our defensive measure. I don't know how we fix that, but I think that's a crisis.
It's interesting. May I?
Oh, sure.
At AIPLA, I listened to a panel session in which one of the speakers was a patent lawyer from Google.
Yeah.
That was pretty informative, talking about the 101 issues, which I guess they run into regularly with software. And he said what he does, and I guess is done generally around Google, is the first thing that they'll do is they'll ask the examiner to put 101 aside, and they'll talk to the examiner about 102 and 103 issues. And they found if you can convince the examiner about the 102 and 103 issues and then visit 101, you got a hell of a lot better chance of having success with the 101 issue.
I'd invite you to go back
you
and
read Mayo?
read Google, read Google's briefs and a whole series of 101 cases in the Supreme Court where they urge doing 101 first, but that's okay. What do you think of that, Randy?
I, of course, would encourage anything that would get you a better result with prosecution, but I...
Well, let me be more pragmatic on the leadership question. Let's break it a little bit. You've been around government a long time. You've been in government a long
Yes.
time. You've been in Washington a long time.
Yes.
And you've been on the Hill a big chunk of your career. What practically can we do? What realistically? I mean, they have a good senior senator here in Illinois who's carrying a lot of water for us on this issue right now. So they're doing good work here. How do you amplify that? How do you go beyond just somebody here and somebody there?
Well, as you know, Todd, the Congress is going to be reactive, and so you've got to change the environment. And the environment's probably not going to change absent some kind of large stimulus. I liked what Marshall said earlier, that's likely to come from seeing the market lost to China. As Asia moves up and begins to threaten us, then maybe we will recognize that that's because our IP has slipped down. That happened in the 80s, and the result was the creation of the Federal Circuit.
That's right. Is there an elevator speech that can synthesize that?
I thought he just gave it.
As you, well, sort of, okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Marshall, go ahead.
Yeah, Japan.
Yeah, Japan was going to take over the world.
Yeah, but Marshall, the problem we have is that you've got the Google, Oracle, Intel wing on one side, and you've got the pharma, Microsoft, whatever.
Well, you really only have the policy people. You talk to the Google practitioners, and you talk to the Cisco practitioners, and you talk to the guys who are trying to have to get the patents through. They still complain mercilessly about not being able to get them in over 101.
They're cutting us off here, Todd.
I see it.
We started early, so ask some audience.
Sure. Questions from the audience? Over here, yes, John. Real loud, wait for the mic. Because I was sitting in the back and couldn't hear a thing. I'm sensitive.
For the IIPCC, I was hoping you guys could expand a little bit on one of the flashpoints that Mark Lemley is really exposing right now.
Who?
At Mark Lemley
Never
at
heard of him.
antitrust conferences this summer at Stanford and all over the place, talking about intellectual property as a government franchise versus private property. And maybe that's a flashpoint that we should be paying more attention to, because I think he's got a strategy there. And I'm wondering, how do you evaluate that? What do you think the implications are of government franchise versus private property? And is this something we should be addressing?
Isn't that the oil states case, Rob? And if it's close, if it's
But is
the
that the
oil states
case or something
the
bigger?
Supreme Court will answer it, and I can already tell you what they'll say. They'll say it's a hybrid right.
Right.
Some private, some public, and
If you have
that'll leave it open.
read the Trump administration brief. It says that it's more akin to a land lease than real property, unfortunately. I'll call it the DOJ brief. I'm not sure the Trump administration.
I agree with you on theory, Rob. I just think that it's probably going to get answered in a month or two.
Well, also Lemley famously has the answer to this whole thing. He says it's the pendulum. All we got to do is get the pendulum to stop in the middle. So helpful. Anybody? Another question? Right here. Wait for the mic.
At what point does does this move into an antitrust issue? And let me frame it. So, go back to 1997. Microsoft puts $150 million into Apple. Why? I mean, well, they were being attacked on the antitrust issue on computer market share and whatnot. At some point now, you're seeing all these headlines about Google and Facebook and others having to deal with antitrust issues. Is the patent a lever of opening that dam, if you will, that changes the dynamic and the behavior and break the antitrust view open, because they start treating the companies different at their meeting in the patent courts?
Comment?
Go ahead.
AT&T antitrust. You probably don't want to necessarily go there. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, we're not seeing much antitrust activity these days, which is,
You know, well, one small note in the United States: Macon Delrahim, who just got confirmed as the Attorney General for Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, longtime friend of the community, the IP communities. He used to be at the PTO when I was there. I signed his shingle for tech. He should be very, I think, open, if not very good, on our issues. But go ahead.
well, if you're worried about European enforcement, that's always been, at least the few occasions when I interface with European competition law, it was always crazy to me. So it's no less crazy today than it was 20 years ago when I was actively involved when I was at Unisys. How that's relevant to us today, I really don't know. I mean, it's been quiet for a long time, and I have no reason to believe it's going to become disquiet from anything I've seen or heard.
As long as they exist. They got a bid to buy them today. You might want to hold on for the mic.
One of Qualcomm's alleged sins is that their licensing strategy ties the sale of a chip to a license to use the chip, if you will. And it's hard to make a legal tie argument in the United States with that, but the Europeans, of course, can do almost anything under abuse of a dominant position rubric, and Qualcomm certainly has that in Europe, and so that is the problem for Qualcomm. By the way, they're probably going to be owned by Broadcom in a week, and maybe everything will change. But that is the nub of the argument. So far, that hasn't surfaced in the United States.
But would you put work on any focus on that? Where does it run in the list of problems? Should we worry about it?
Pretty far down in my list of problems.
Okay.
I always like to put that in context. I bet every one of you buys a gourmet cup of coffee from Starbucks every morning for $7. You also buy for $3 the license in your control chip in your phone that works for 5 years. For half the cost of a cup of coffee, you get everything Qualcomm sells you.
You keep your phone for 5 years?
I've got, look at, it's the iPhone 5. I've had it for 10 years.
That'll keep Qualcomm happy.
See?
They, in response, by the way, today to the bid, one of the things they singled out was, on the price at least that was being offered, was that they thought their patent portfolio was worth more than that. Other questions over here? Yep.
So I think in this room there's a lot of agreement on, a need for something to be done. What the fine details of that are, that would be another probably 10 weeks worth of discussion. But as far as, I don't know. I think maybe the question today though is what are we going to do going outside these walls? Because today's a little bit of an echo chamber, and that's great. We all think a lot of the same things. But Judge Rader, you asked the question about about the debate at lunch about does the IP system serve, the small business or the big business? And I would argue that it doesn't serve either. It doesn't serve either. And maybe I'm too idealistic, but I look at it as the patent system comes from the Constitution. The Constitution exists for the people. And the Constitution exists to delegate some powers to the government for, with the consent of the governed. So, when you start talking Constitution with, patent law, then you start sounding like a freak, right? But same thing with, maybe not, but at least not with one. But I think that's kind of the answer. And it's not going to the Constitution, but it's talking about putting this in the context of, the issues that matter to the people that we really want to educate. And when you're talking up on the Hill, you're talking jobs, you're talking competition, and we did hear a little bit of that, but we need to talk about it in where patent law hits Main Street. And it's also things such as like the Ariosa and the BRCA2 gene. And we want to talk about women's
Congress
issues.
shall have the power to do or not do whatever it wants to do. And that means they can outlaw the patent system if they want. And they can cut it back, and they can make a PTAB, and they can double the PTAB. So the Constitution gives us a basis, but not an answer.
All right. Other question or comment? Do you want to follow up on that, or?
Yeah, I do. And that's fine. It does give us a basis, but it's what do the people really care about? And yeah, it's a basis, but what the people care about are women's issues, about education, about healthcare, about jobs, about quality of life. And that's what the patent system is intended for. And you can go back and you can argue all you want about a whole lot of different things in the Constitution and what was the root cause of them. Choose your amendment, choose your whatever. But I don't think there's too much debate over what the patent system and the IP system as a whole was intended to do. And I think that the IP issues that we're talking about today, it's an area that a lot of people can kind of agree on, and I think it's a set of issues that people up on the Hill can get behind and work in a bipartisan manner, because we're talking about jobs, we're talking about health, we're talking about education, we're talking about things that make a difference in people's lives. So I think we have a great issue, and I think if we wrap the right message on it, which is many of the things that I just mentioned, we put that right wrapper on there, and I think there's a receptive audience to it in the public.
Let me ask you a tougher question.
Sure.
One of the key drivers of the whole troll debate and that whole change that came about, and the companies who were involved in it, was that they funded it to a probably multi-millions of dollars campaign, well, for all sorts of things, op-ed pages and meetings on the Hill and you name it, fly-ins, and they funded it. Who funds this? Where do we get it?
Who funded that message?
Who funds what you're talking about? Who funds the education effort, the PR campaign?
So the answer there is, I think it's us. I think it's the people who we talk to as well. I mean, I think most people here probably spent some money to be here today, and I think that's a good first step. And I also think that we're all from a lot of different parts of the country. I'm from Iowa. I mean, Senator Grassley is got a lot to say on these issues, and I got a lot of work to do on him. But I think it's not just a money issue, though. It's a message issue. You can spend all the money you want, but if you don't have the right message, it's not going anywhere. And like I said, I'm an idealistic guy, right? I go to D.C. I'm not a Beltway guy, but I'm a pragmatic guy who believes in the message of America. I believe in the patent system, and I believe that this pendulum is swinging back, and I think we'll get there. So anyway, I've probably said enough for today, but you understand where I'm coming from.
There's a
And
good
I
note
think we need to get that
Tim,
message
Whoops,
outside
there's one
these walls.
question. There's one just wailing away in the back there.
Last question. Harry.
I really think that that Gary hit on something that really reminded me of a lot of what I had to struggle with when I was in-house. And when you mentioned economics, and I think the focus on the economics is really where the winning argument for Congress, even from a social aspect for the judiciary, and even for people, ordinary people. Because the question that I always got when I was in-house was, what's the cost and what's the benefit? And the benefit has to exceed the cost in order for there to be value. And I think that really applies here in across the board. And I think that that's really one way that we can really win this fight, is to focus on the economics and the benefits that are derived over the costs that we have to suffer to get there.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Bruce?